So the first written assignment you will encounter in this class is your discussion board posts. These are required almost every week. There's a couple of weeks where they're a little bit different. But for the most part, we have discussion board posts every single week. And this is capturing a number of different things. The intention on the one hand is to make sure that students are keeping up with the material, so you don't get to December and go, oh heavens, I haven't read anything up to this point. That's a really difficult place for students to be. So if we spread it out like that, then it keeps everyone on track. They also replace sort of the discussion and the back and forth of the classroom, not perfectly, but that's sort of what we're going for. So in a lot of ways, the conversation about those discussion boards is partially about participation, more so than correctness. And I say that with the understanding that you actually have to make 3 discussion board posts every week. The first one is we're covering content, but in an attempt to keep our lectures short. So I'm generally aiming for under 10 minutes, and certainly under 15 for every lecture that you have to watch. That's what all of our research says is manageable for people. It allows you to sort of fit your schooling in with whatever time you have available to you, and also it means that no one has to listen to an hour and a half of me talking straight. That doesn't sound like fun to anyone, so we're not going to do it. So we're going to record relatively short lectures, and what that means is that I'm conveying less information than I might otherwise do. So I'm not, for example, giving very long explanations and covering every single possible name and date and sort of all of those context pieces about how many people or what sort of timeline or what it all costs. And so one of the discussion board posts that you need to make is to fill in some piece of that missing information. So you need to provide what is sort of described roughly as a new fact to the discussion. And the important thing to remember about that, there are a couple of brief things there. First, when you provide that fact, you have to be providing something that's new. That means you cannot be repeating something that I said in my lectures, and you can't just be parroting back something that's in your textbook. The expectation is that all of your classmates have read that textbook and have listened to the lectures that I've done on the subject. So what you're looking for is something different than that. That probably means you're doing a little bit of work on Google, on Wikipedia, on the Canadian Encyclopedia. For this, I'm not super worried about the source. What I'm worried about is sort of that you're providing some piece of information that adds to our understanding of the sort of topic in the unit. When you do that, the fact itself is not enough. You cannot sort of look at something like the conscription crises and say that 700,000 Francophone soldiers failed to report for the draft. That's a number, it's a fact, but what you need to do to get full marks in that is to sort of say 700,000 Francophone soldiers didn't show up for the draft, and that means, in that case, for example, that you have a vast majority, like a very strong minority, so it's about 40% of the Francophone soldiers who were drafted who decided not to show up. And that is accompanied by sort of a relatively small proportion of draft dodgers in Anglophone Canada, then that creates some tension. So what you need to do is you need to give me that number, if that's what you're working with, and also give it some context in terms of why does it matter. The why does it matter is directly sort of related to understanding the content. So if you're going to tell me that the price of a homestead was this, okay, what does that mean? How do we interpret that in terms of context? Is that a lot of money at the time, not a lot of money at the time? What sort of does that look like? You can do that kind of contextualization in any number of different ways, but you're looking for that sort of new fact piece. As you do that, if you're at all sort of unconcerned, be aware that if you do your post certainly earlier in the week, I stop into those discussion boards pretty much every day. And I'm sort of looking for places where I need to add something, clarify something, or ask a student to do that. So if you posted a piece of information that is interesting but you haven't given me enough context, if you posted it early enough in the week, I'll go back into that discussion thread and say, hey, can you fill in what this means? I'm not really sure I understand what you mean by X. So that is available to you, and that's designed for that. The second discussion board post that you are responsible for in any given unit is that you need to give me some conversation about how any of what we're talking about in that unit is relevant in the present day. So our first unit is talking about Francophone colonization, our second unit is talking about Anglophone colonization. And when you look at sort of writing a conversation about how any of that is relevant, what you're looking for is some piece of that. You don't necessarily have to say the whole unit is relevant because, in fact, I would discourage you from doing that. That's a difficult argument to make. But when you're making those sorts of arguments about this piece, so this piece of information, this idea that sort of shows up in this sort of theme, in this unit, this philosophical position, this set of laws, this idea, tell me why it's relevant, not is exactly like today, right now, but sort of in a contemporary context, in your lifetime. Why does that matter? So there's a lot of conversations and a lot of ways to do that. When I'm evaluating that, it's really about your thinking. So if you sort of say that Francophone tension, like Anglophone Francophone tensions, and we'll get to those in the next couple of weeks, are really, really important, and some of your classmates disagree with you and say, well, this sort of tells us that it's not important, you can both get perfectly good marks in that. What I want you to do is to be thinking about that piece of why is this relevant. And just a quick heads up, this is in the course outline, but I'll give it to you here as well. That assignment about figuring out how this stuff is still relevant is a lot harder than it sounds. I usually describe it to students and they sort of go, oh yeah, okay. And then they sit down to do it and go, oh. And I'm just giving you the heads up so that you don't start the first one at 11:25 on Sunday night instead of doing it a little bit earlier in the week. So you have some time to think about it. Your third discussion board post is simpler and a little bit more open-ended, which is you got to respond to something that one of your classmates has posted. And when you do that, you need to respond what I've described as substantively. And what that sort of means is I want you responding to the ideas behind what someone is saying. When you respond to their facts, you might be sort of saying your fact is wrong, or you might be saying, yeah, but that pales in comparison to this other thing over here that's way more important. You can respond in that way. You can respond to their sort of contemporary analysis and say, I hadn't thought about it that way. I really see this outcome that you're suggesting as connected to this unit we're talking about as being the result of something entirely different. That's fine. What you can't do, or you can't do and get full marks for, is say, I agree, or great post, because that doesn't tell me anything about what you are learning and how you are engaging with what your peers are saying. So that's an important thing to do. And that also means, sort of from a social management perspective, that it makes a lot of sense to at least try to get one or two of your posts in earlier in the week, just because otherwise there's nothing for people to respond to. So if you don't like doing your work at 11 o'clock on Sunday night right before it's due, I know I don't, I'd rather be sleeping, then you should probably be part of a group of people who's posting earlier in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, even Thursday, so that other people have something to respond to. And if more of you do it, then you have more of an opportunity to do it that way too. As I said, there are a couple of weeks where that is not the case. So there's a couple of posts in our first week where you just have to respond to the prompts that I've provided. There's our Heritage Minute week, which I will get to, where you're just responding to student presentations. But those are coming up a little bit later on, and I will get to them. All right? So that's a rough description of what a good discussion board post looks like. The last video we're going to do today is talking a little bit about what your Heritage Minute assignment is.